everyone. Thank you very much for coming along this evening. This is a special event. We're very fortunate to have an overseas visitor joining us tonight. So this is over and above our normal Griffith Entrepreneurship Public Lecture Series, and great to see a good turnout. And so tonight we're talking about social enterprise, which is very near and dear to a number of our hearts, and I see a lot of familiar faces. And so look, we'll get the party started, and first I'd like to introduce Roma Williams-Pragat. She's going to give us an acknowledgement to country. We're very lucky to have Roma here with us. She works as a consultant in the areas of business development, corporate governance, risk and compliance and events management, and is also a cultural tour guide. She is a very proud Griffith alumni and currently provides tutoring in business management, tourism, hotels and hospitality at Griffith Uni and University of Queensland. She also contributes to the personal development of Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth and aspiring entrepreneurs through personal mentoring programs and international presentations. So I'd like to welcome Roma.
Thank you, Maria. Jingari, that's hello in my language, Jingari. Sorry. I'd like to welcome you to this evening. I'm actually able to do a welcome to country. Previously I was only able to do an acknowledgement, but I've actually been given the privilege of welcoming you to my country. So yes, I'm very privileged and pleased to do that. I'm very pleased to be here this evening, and thank you for asking me to come. I'm a descendant from the Yugambeh language group, and that has 8 clans, family clans in the group. My great-great-great-grandfather was Billen Billen, and he was also known as King Jackie Jackie, and he was the leader of the Yugambeh people at the time when Australia was colonised. Our land stretches from Logan up to Tweed and over to Stradbroke Island and Bow Desert, and I'd like to welcome you, and I'd like to pay my respects to all of the elders, past and present, and I would also like to acknowledge the Yugambeh language group, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for that, Roma, and thank you so much to Griffith University, Logan Office of Economic Development, and also Substation 33 for being able to put this fantastic special event for you at no cost. We're so proud of the great community network we have here with Griffith University, and there's a real commitment, and I think Professor Leslie Chenoweth, who recently retired, would be so proud of us here tonight, to be coming together to have a really good community conversation. So this isn't just about academia, community, non-for-profits. This is really very exciting times for us, and so I'm very, very pleased now to introduce you to our guest speaker for the evening. Alex Hannant, I'm very pleased to say, is joining us. He's the CEO of the Ākina Foundation, an organisation focused on the growth of social enterprises. Ākina provides a range of specialised services that support social enterprise to start up and succeed from innovation process to investment strategy. Ākina also works with community, government, business and philanthropic partners to develop New Zealand's social enterprise sector and advance broader thinking around social impact and inclusive economic development. Alex serves on the boards of B-Lab Australia and New Zealand and Pomegranate Kitchen, and also co-teaches a course on leading social enterprise at Victoria University of Wellington. So we'll be very interested to hear more about that, and hopefully we can do some of that here at Griffith University. Previously based in the UK, Alex was Director of Programs at LEAD, a global network focused on leadership and sustainable development. He was also Head of Partnerships at the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, a global initiative providing technical advice and services to decision makers in developing countries. So that's a very broad range of experiences, so we really look forward to hearing what Alex has got to say. So thank you, I'll hand over.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks for having me. Everyone can hear me well? Just to give me a sense of who's here, can you put your hand up if you're actually working or studying in the university? And put your hand up if you're from government, local or central. Or if you're working in the community. And if you're working specifically around social enterprise. Great. So, you know, it's sort of like got the system in the room to a certain degree. Who's working in mainstream business? Yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to miss you guys out. Great. So, it's fab to be here. I think probably starting off around this whole kind of social enterprise thing about my journey. And my journey sort of started, I suppose, specifically in social enterprise in the early noughties. When I read a book, I'm not sure if anyone's read this, by David Bornstein. It kind of tells the story of Ashoka, which was probably one of the first organisations which coined the term social entrepreneurship and went intentionally out to find these people, or these teams, and support them to enable them to succeed. And there was a book which tells stories of people taking on incredibly complex problems and with compassion and values finding innovative ways to solve them, many at scale. And also, the thing that I loved about it was the independence. That a lot of these individuals or teams could find a commercial or financial model which enabled them to drive their impact. And that seemed to me like a good idea. So at that time I was thinking deeply about my life, and I was going back to my university, Victoria University, that I'm now teaching, and I wanted to study social entrepreneurship. I got told I couldn't, because no one knew anything about it. And I'm pretty sure I got marked down on an assignment because I tried to introduce a business model to developing an aid project. But it wasn't really until I got out into the field working in development issues where I came face to face with people that were doing this work, and I became truly inspired. And this was the India Himalaya. And I can remember working with a biologist who came from a village which was suffering erosion as a result of climate change. And she was developing a strand of bamboo which could be planted to stop the erosion. She was also working on a voluntary carbon project which would get income by sequestering carbon. And then she was also working with the community to harvest the bamboo in a way which would create product or resource to create handicraft products and create livelihoods. And I was just like, wow. You're innovating with science, you're playing the financial instrument systems around climate change, and you're embedding your community and finding a way to give them sustainable development. And I thought, how the hell do we get more of these people? So, having really got intimidated by working in other people's countries where I had no legitimacy on issues which were far too big for my brain to conceive of, I decided to go back to New Zealand, and I had the chance to take over a small organisation that was focused on sustainability and climate change. And really, at that point, I wanted to repurpose that organisation, not to change the outcomes, but to change the way that we did our business. And my focus at Ākina, which is a Maori word for call for bold action and to encourage others through challenges, was to say, we want a sustainable, prosperous and inclusive world. And our theory of change is that we can make a contribution towards that if there are more social enterprises starting and succeeding. And we thought that the weakness in the system was there was no formalised support, and so we would become a support organisation to reach out to those individuals, to those communities, to those businesses, and help them grow to deliver impact. And 6 years on, to give you a sense of scale, we work across the whole country. Last year we would have worked with 750 social enterprises, many of them at an early stage, but 100 which are now have real commercial models and are delivering real impact. And tonight I'm really going to sort of cover two parts. First is sort of trying to paint a picture of the understanding and learning I've developed around social enterprise, how business and impact models can work together. To also sort of look at the diversity and tackle some of these sort of difficult issues around definitions, which we've spent a lot of time and anxiety on trying to figure out who we are and what we're doing and who's included and who's not. And then also as part of this painting the picture, just to sort of look at what are the bigger shifts in the world that are happening at the moment, which makes social enterprise more inevitable. And then the second part, if you're still awake and you're still here, is really reflecting practice. So in our experience, what are the development enablers and challenges of people who are trying to develop social enterprise, and how can those barriers be overcome? The second part is about strategy, because it's okay to support X number of businesses, but if you're not shifting the system to create a more enabling environment, if you're not changing policy, if you're not changing capital markets, if you're not changing consumer awareness and expectations, you'll always be developing things in a niche way. And last of all, just want to end with thinking, what does it look, we are at a university, what does it look like to grow more talent in this area who can be more effective at driving change with compassion into the future? Now, I was given an hour and I relish the opportunity to speak, but I also recognise that I don't want this to become too monotonous. So please accept the invitation, and if you want to ask a question as I'm going through, just do it, okay? So please feel free to interrupt me. Okay, so how? You notice here, like usually you start with the why. I've kind of figured actually I'm going to leave that a little bit and actually start, how does this work? So social enterprise at simplest level is exactly what it says on the tin. Social mission, business models to deliver. But how does that actually work? And we effectively see three basic models of how business and impact combine. And the first one is really simple. You have a successful business which raises money, which you can then donate or invest to deliver other services. And we're surrounded and have been surrounded by these models for years. So the SPCA, just down the road from where I live in Wellington, has a shop that sells pet food. It has a veterinary surgery, which provides veterinary services. But the profit it generates from them, those services, then enables it to fund other activities which don't have a market to operate in and make it less vulnerable to donations and grants. So these models, the charity shops, we're very, very familiar with. Have a business, raise money, do something with it. Social enterprises that sort of jazz it up, something like Toast Relay, started in the UK, now open in New York, also South Africa, planning to open up in New Zealand after the Social Enterprise Model Forum that we're hosting later in the month. Their focus is food waste. So they make beer out of waste bread, but the big play is that all the profit they generate from the sale of beer goes to food rescue charities. Also happens in a community context. Whale Watch in the town of Kaikoura on the east coast of the South Island. It is an ecotourism business, but the profits that the community generate from that business, it's Māori owned, go into education scholarships for young people within the community. Business here, make money, create good with it. Simple, huh? And you also, things that you might be familiar with, the buy one, give one model. So we have social enterprise Eat My Lunch. Guess what? You buy a lunch from them, they gift a lunch away. So there's an integrity between the product or the service in that sense, but it's the same thing. You buy in here, raises resource which subsidises the delivery of something else. So that's the simplest model. And you see this in any number of ways. One of the problems of this model, though, is the business, what you do in the business that creates the resource, may go to actions which you don't have any control of. So you maybe have all the good intentions to run a great business, then give it to a partner who does a lousy job. So very valuable in creating more resource to do good stuff, but that disconnect sometimes means that the business performance and the impact created in the world are out of step. The second model is when the impact and the business go side by side. So the Whānau Trust in several sites in the North Island of New Zealand. Their business is environmental restoration, and they have a nursery for native plants. They provide environmental services, they grow plants and they sell them. The impact is that that was staffed by people who were coming out of prison, had addiction problems, or otherwise being left behind. So the business is not the impact, but the impact is embedded in the business because it's creating the employment opportunities for those people to get back on their feet. Same thing, Pomegranate Kitchen, that I'm on the board of. This is a catering business which uses the skills and capacities of former refugee women coming from the Middle East. It gives them language training, stability, and uses their strengths as they make cuisine which, you know, is delicious and very much liked by the good folk of Wellington. It can also happen in an environmental sense. Guayaki, which is an American social enterprise, they sell yerba mate, which is kind of effectively a tea. Now the thing is, yerba mate grows under the rainforest canopy. So guess what? In order to create more products, they have to restore the Amazon. Yeah? So drinking tea is not an impact, but the impact is interdependent with the business model. Same thing, Wilding & Co in New Zealand, we've got a big problem with wilding pines. So fir trees which just grow uncontrollably, become ecological pests, cause landowners lots of problems, wiping out our natural habitat. They have some IP which turns wilding saplings into essential oil, which then they sell. So again, side by side. The last model I'm going to talk about is when the impact and the business are conjoined. It's direct. So ThoughtWired have developed technology to enable people with profound mental disabilities to use a computer with their mind. Now, that could be a commercial business, but the point is they are trying to develop it at a price point that will maximise opportunity for people to get access to that, not maximise profits. The founder has a younger brother who is afflicted by locked-in syndrome, and that is his passion and a problem that he wants to solve for families around the world. AfriPads that started in Uganda. A significant number of women in Africa and girls miss school or work through lack of sanitation. So AfriPads created a reusable, hygienic, appropriately priced product which has now reached over, I think, about 250,000 women through a number of different countries. So the direct impact is the business. It's a good product, but priced and marketed and delivered in such a way that it maximises the impact on the problem rather than trying to maximise the profit. It can also happen in the community sense. The Goodwin Development Trust is in Hull in the UK, and it started off with a community guidance group to council about how they could use some of the facilities. And after a while, some brave official in the council said, you know what, you do this far better than us, why don't you actually do it? So the council actually transferred the assets and enabled the Goodwin Development Trust to incorporate, and they now own kindergartens, convention centres, leisure centres, social housing. They turn over about 50 million a year and employ about 350 people. Because they are owned by the community, they understand the community and they deliver services which are needed by the community, and as a result they're also commercially successful. So this kind of idea that donation side by side and direct, another way of understanding it is the relationship between business and impact is independent in that donation model, it is interdependent on side by side, and it's integrated when it's direct. There's also a sense of flexibility, right? So a business model can actually have multiple relationships to impact. So the cafe, you know, community cafes and community gardens, right? Anyone wants to open a cafe. It's a hard business to do as well. But the fact is, you can have a business cafe which turned a profit and then was donated away. You could have a business cafe which employed people with disabilities. You could have a business cafe which was bringing in organic, local produce from the local community and also giving health benefits to the customer. So the thing is, your impact and your business, there's a huge amount of creativity and flexibility between the two, and there's no limitations. The good social enterprise double down, triple down. So things like the Eden Project, that was the station, used to be a quarry. Cornwall is the poorest county in the UK, and the Eden Project was a vision by Tim Schmidt. Started off with like £25,000 grant, and is now the primary, one of the primary tourist attractions in the UK. They reckon it's contributed about 1.15 billion to the local economy since it's been open for the last 15 years. Now the thing is, with the Eden Project, it is providing a direct service, environmental education. It is also side by side, providing supply chains for local producers and providing employment for people that would otherwise be out of work. And it is also providing a donation model because it funds and seeds new initiatives in the region. So there is no limitation here. You know, it just requires a bit of creativity and a bit of nous to figure out how you can get business and service to a wider vision and purpose. And the beautiful thing about social enterprise is that when it works, everyone sort of goes to the financial piece, is, oh great, you know, like we can pay our way. But it's really important to think that if you are financially sustainable, you're also independent. And if you're independent, you're more likely to be innovative, I think, because you're not serving the whims of your funders. You're interested on the concerns of your customers or your community, your stakeholders. So you are free to lean into the problems in a way where you're not if you're just trying to chase the next grant check. Also, it is social, it's environmental, but it's also economic. And lastly, there's a sense of independence is also about empowerment. It's not about treating communities as the recipients of generosity or services. It's actually giving back esteem, creating social capital, and giving people the power to deliberate. So it's a very powerful tool when it works. Okay, so this is the section which I was kind of dreading in some ways. The dreaded definitions, the tricky definitions. This continuum is used everywhere in the social enterprise literature. And I think it's really useful. Because you're basically enabling people who learn social what, enterprise what, to get their head around, look, you know what charities are, you know what businesses are, and you kind of think about hybrid in the middle. And it talks about sort of different types or different stages. And the social enterprise is in the middle. It's also sort of been the basis of trying to lock down this idea of definition. So what we hear a lot about social enterprise is like, oh, they must have a certain percentage of trading activity, or they must have a certain percentage reinvested in them. And the point of that is really about trying to manage risk, right? We're still really uncomfortable with the idea of serving a social purpose, but potentially also having a private benefit, and there is some good reason to that. But this kind of sort of management of being really specific about the definition has caused us a lot of problems. For example, it doesn't even stack up, like, because this whole idea about, of course, you have to have a viable business in a social enterprise, but it's sometimes misleading to give a certain percentage. I know many social enterprises which their business is sustainable, and that actually makes them a very attractive partner for philanthropics to deliver other activities. Because a philanthropic might be able to get an organisation who's providing food services, you know, around, you know, children growing up in malnutrition. It might be best placed to do other things with that group. And guess what? You don't have to pay for the operational cost either. So the thing is, you might look at the balance sheet at the end and sort of think like, oh, well, their business is only 40% turnover and they've got all these grants. But it doesn't make them not a social enterprise. Because the thing is, they are sustainable, but they're just capable of doing other things. The next thing about this whole thing about profits being reinvested, again, is problematic because a lot of social enterprises we work with work in sub-market conditions. So they're actually working with people that can't afford a market price, and they are pre-distributing by charging a much lower price. So it seems a bit harsh to ask them to reinvest the profits when they're making, you know, sort of, you know, nothing in the first place. So some of these things, I think, get very obsessed with this kind of not-for-profit, for-profit, and this is a cliche. But you know, it's the point is, it's like outside of, it's not what you are not, You know, it's just like, what are we trying to think about here? Trying to use business models to deliver broader social change. And the idea about trying to find things which are comparable or specific or driven biology, I think has created people a lot of anxiety. Also, the thing is, the ideology around social enterprise is very different around the world. So if you go to the UK, yes, it is this kind of not-for-profit, for-profit thing, because a lot of social enterprise has reflected the increasing commercial nature of the not-for-profit sector. But if you go to Italy and Spain, social enterprise is all about mutuals and the property movement. It's about solidarity. It's about self-help. You know, and that predates, you know, sort of the transformation of the community sector in terms of not-for-profits in many respects. If you go to the United States, it has an entrepreneurship, you know, because that relates to the culture, you know, of the States. If you look a lot in Asia, they're seeing social enterprise as basically welfare system 3.0. You know, basically partnering and creating up these organisations to deliver essential services. And if you look in the development context, you're basically saying, you know, it's the Wild West in some cases, and social enterprises, mission-led businesses are the best way to provide essential services into big problems. So the ideology about for-profit and not-for-profit is something that in many cases we're projecting onto it. This is my experience of seeing the conversations in New Zealand, rather than necessarily understanding that different people are holding the idea of using business for social benefit in different ways. This is a bit geeky, but this study looked at the use of social enterprise in the literature over the years. And basically, if you go back last century, social enterprise was all about cooperatives, and slowly over the last 15 or 20 years, it's moved to community enterprise, social business, and earned income from non-profit. So, you know, again, going back to this idea about what is appropriate and not, ignores the fact that, you know, sort of these definitions are the cuckoo in the first place. And the other key point being here is the movement from sort of a collective solidarity position to an individualistic one. And some things that I'm keen to point out is that cooperative movements and solidarity, you know, are quite different from the charitable model. Charities are quite hierarchical in themselves. And social enterprise is not just about doing good things, it's also about the type of organisation that we are. You know, it's about having greater democracy within them. Certainly our experiences of working with Māori in New Zealand on social enterprise is that they do not want to be colonised again. They don't want to be colonised with how we define it or we think it is. And our work has been a steep learning process that it absolutely has value for Māori, and they see huge use in it, but they want to re-own it and repurpose it within a co-proper Māori approach. So just to sort of finish off, I think, you know, sort of rather than thinking about, you know, what the definition should be, when we're talking about social enterprise, we should just recognise that lots of different groups are using business to create social change, and they're coming from very different cultural places. And if we're going to be fussy about anything, it shouldn't be about percentages. It should be making sure that they are genuine in their social intent and purpose, that they do have a viable business model, and that they are publicly accountable. So if you say you're going to be delivering this impact, show it. And if those things are aligned, we should be more generous around, you know, sort of the breadth and diversity of social enterprise that we want to encourage. Cool. So, so why is this happening now? So one thing it never makes it, being alive now is kind of like an amazing thing. You know, like, you know, sort of being human on the world right now is an amazing thing. And this is something you're probably aware of, the sense of we are in a new era of man. We are now in a position where we're so powerful we can actually fundamentally change the Earth system. You know, and this has only happened recently. You know, and you know, this kind of idea of an age of acceleration, the words will be too small, but you'll see the point, right? Socioeconomic trends and Earth system trends. Over the last 100 years, everything is going like that. I'm clearly a young man, but when I was born, there were half the people on the planet than there are now. So we are living in an exceptional time, and so it's only, I suppose, natural that we are needing to think about the things that we think are normal to change and adapt to the world that we're living in the future. Because we're, you know, things like resource consumption. This is kind of an interesting fact. The US in 100 years, you know, used that amount of concrete. China used it in 3 years. it was just a few years ago. So massive change, huge stress on the planet. And I'd say without doubt this is now the best time ever to be alive, but there's also a sense we could be doing a lot better. There's a survey which is done every year by an organisation called Endelman around how much we trust our institutions. And what they're seeing is an ongoing decline. And this year, 85% of people responded saying that we do not believe the system's working for us. And I guess you start to see that expressing itself in any number of shapes and forms. The other thing is, we are living in the best time ever to be alive. I couldn't think of a better time to be alive. But we're also creating significant risks in the system. So the whole nascent to leave, the whole idea that history doesn't crawl, it jumps. And while we perhaps live in a more peaceful time, if you look at the overall amount of violence in the world, we know that we have the capacity to just flip things off if the wrong people get in control. So there's a sense of it's good, but it could be better, and we're increasing risk. And generally, we're starting to think about new ways around the economy. So things like donut economics really sort of express this new economy movement. And it's basically saying that, look, this idea of like the economy, society, environment, and there being an optimal place in the middle is a myth. It's a self-evident truth we live in a ball of rock in the middle of nowhere, and we have to actually respect the integrity of the Earth system. But also, there's no point being human and alive unless we're providing social foundations for people to thrive. So the economy has to live within these things, respecting planetary boundaries, providing social platforms to survive. And if you think about the model of social enterprise, which is biased towards redistribution, externalises benefits, not costs, and about solving problems and managing the risks that might come up, it seems to be the business model of the future. Certainly, you're starting to see the Sustainable Development Goals, and starting to sort of create a new narrative around what the hell are we here for. And from a big business point of view, in Australia and New Zealand, 43% of big business said that the Sustainable Development Goals are now in their thinking towards where their business and their business growth is going in the future. So they're not social enterprise, but they're starting to factor in social and environmental concerns in a new way. The same with the source of capital. EY did a survey on global investors, institutional investors, and effectively anything in gold and silver is an indication of where the big money is going once you take social and environmental outcomes into account. Also, from a business point of view, you've got a war for talent. The new generation not only want to buy more ethical products, but they want to work for ethical organisations. So whether it's being changed from without or within, we are starting to see significant movement in mainstream business the world over. The other reason about why is this happening now is because the nature of our government is changing. The way we do government. Government used to deliver everything, and then it started outsourcing. But things like the disability insurance scheme here in Australia is now devolving budget to service users. So for places where there was no market before, markets are now being created. So who's going to deliver those services? And my kind of feeling is just like, do I want Serco to be delivering Meals on Wheels to me when I'm an old man? Or would I prefer a mission-led organisation that cares about my well-being to do it? So these new markets will be created, and who's going to fill them? The last thing is that the not-for-profit sector is in itself changing over time anyway. So this graph basically points to total income from UK charitable organisations and where they're getting the money from. The light blue is from grants. The rest is trading activity. Our not-for-profits are mostly trading organisations already. Australia and New Zealand, the same thing. The growth in where income is coming from in the community and not-for-profit sector is through trade. Some of that with government, because government's changing the way it works, but also a lot of independent activity. So the point here is, outside of people wanting to do social enterprise, business is leaning in, government is creating more market space, and the community sector is naturally becoming more enterprising. And so another way of thinking about social enterprise is kind of the negative space. Social enterprise is the natural activity which is filling the space of this convergence and blurring between boundaries in traditional sectors. So look, that's the beginning of the first part in terms of looking at how business and impact models interact, trying to look around about who is doing social enterprise and recognising the diversity of organisations and coming from different spaces using business for social change. And lastly, recognising there are some essentially meta trends that are going on in the public, private and community sector, which are making it more inevitable that we are moving into a space of innovation and enterprise for public good. So, sounds great, doesn't it, social enterprise? Problem is, it's really hard work. Running any business, and all the guys that put their hand up in the end know that, running a business is really, really tough. And all the people that work in community will know working in community is really, really tough. I'm not sure, so doing both is twice as hard, but sometimes it feels like it. Because not only are you trying to validate that business model and make sure that you're turning a revenue, you've got this issue of making sure that you don't create a whole heap of chaos and unintended consequences. There's kind of a story which I understand to be true, but I may exaggerate. But it's a nice story that these guys developed these, wanted to solve the problem of women in villages in Africa having to basically walk hours a day to collect water, back-breaking work. And so they developed these ingenious pumps which would be driven by the joyful play of children, and it would bring water up, and the women would no longer have to do the back-breaking work. They went back for the evaluation, and these things were deserted. And it was basically because although it was back-breaking work, it was also the only time that women had to alone together. So they didn't understand the context they were working with. And sometimes it's not good enough just to create a solution. It's the whole process you have to go to understand the system you're working in, understand the context, understand the community, evolve that system to a point where it actually meets the needs of the people you want to serve, rather than just following an idea. So this is the problem, because a lot of the time in the social sector we get grants where it's basically money, gifts for activities. But if you're delivering social enterprise, it takes time. And a lot of the work at the beginning is sunk investment, where no money's coming in, and you're desperately trying to find something that works. And if you're not getting the support, you're likely to fall over. There's this idea of the pioneer gap. So different stages of enterprise development, from having an idea to validating it to trying to prepare your operations to go into scale. A lot of people have great ideas but never make it through because they're just simply not resourced. Don't have the money to put food on the table, don't have the energy to work 2 jobs, basically run out of energy trying to convince people that they're onto something. So when we look at the practice of enabling people to succeed, we've come to sort of almost think about a holy trinity. And that's firstly providing the capability support, making sure that people have access to the coaching, the mentoring, the technical assistance, the process, the peers, the training. All these things which can equip people with the confidence and capability to get on at various stages of their ventures. Secondly, that they have access to the right type of finance. Again, grants aren't very good for innovation because grants expect you to deliver stuff rather than just actually do the development work and potentially come up with nothing concrete apart from learning. The last one is access to market. If you're going to have a viable business model, you've got to be able to trade. So whether it's finding consumers, whether it's finding, getting supply chains, or whether it's being articulating and selling your impact, you have to be able to do that in order to develop a viable business model. So looking around the world, we've sort of seen sort of approaches to sort of solving some of these problems. Scotland, who I think is probably the most advanced ecosystem for social enterprise in the world, has been doing it for years. Their regional development agency in Highlands and Islands has never distinguished commercial enterprise from community and social enterprise. They have an organisation, half of it works in commercial, the other half works in community, supporting communities to organise and build their own businesses. At Ākina, over the time that we've been working, we've basically sort of figured out what support is needed for people on their enterprise journey at different stages of their development. So we've developed a sort of series of programs or services which speak to initial skills development, into sort of basically community development, into startup support, into growth services, and then last of all, tailored advisory, which helps them get ready for investment or to take on contracts. Now, it's very rare that you ever have an organisation that bounces all the way up the ladder, but what we wanted to do was ensure that the appropriate support services were in play for people regardless of where they were on their journey. I think the last point I'd just say about capability building, particularly if you're coming from an institutional point of view, is like, why aren't we going out of our way to support these people? You know, they represent such a big prize if they succeed. And it's sometimes that the people who are doing the work seem to be struggling in spite of the system, rather than actually sort of being embraced by it. And certainly one of the sort of key problems we have, see is the burnout of talent. You know, so how do you equip the people and make sure that that journey, which is already difficult, isn't tougher than it needs to be? So the second piece around the financing, and you know, over the sort of last number of years, like a name has been put around social entrepreneurship and social enterprise, there has been a name put on, and the jargon is around impact investing. And it basically represents a sort of, from a commercial sense, a movement in from traditional into responsible investment to ESG, into positively looking for impacts along with returns. And from the philanthropic point of view, it moves into venture philanthropy to actually, rather than just using grants in innovative ways, actually using the balance sheet of the foundation to invest, rather than just invest over here to give over here. You can invest in impact as well as granting away. So this kind of area is absolutely key to grow in order to make sure that social and community enterprises get that essential resource, either a startup stage or a growth stage, to get on. And, you know, seeing a huge diversity and, you know, many sort of initiatives here in Australia, you know, the likes of NAB with their Readiness Fund, which is now being handed over to Impact Investment Australia, supporting organisations to raise capital. In the UK, you've got things like Big Society Capital, which is a wholesale fund owned by the government, which supports smaller funds. And, you know, you've even got things like tax incentives, which are encouraging people to invest in social enterprises in the same way that you'll get a tax credit if you invest in charity, you'll get the same if you invest in a social enterprise. So there's a number of things which are sort of coming to alive in that ecosystem, which are starting to provide the finance that the social enterprise needs to grow. Done well, this is a nice example. Bristol Together, their business is retrofitting houses. Their impact is supporting offenders coming out of prison. And they basically provide that support because the retrofitting the houses basically covers the cost of it. They raised about £90,000 in the Readiness Grant, which enabled them to raise $1.6 million. They're now self-sustaining through their business operations. And the reoffending results as a result of that social enterprise are 3% compared to a national average of 26%. So the government, who actually enabled that Readiness Grant, which then leveraged the private capital, is getting a £13 return for every £1 it's in the first place. So it's a really sophisticated play if it's done well. But unfortunately, what we are starting to see is that the investment is often leading the conversation and overseeing the needs of social enterprises, which are often working in sub-market conditions and can't offer the rate of return that a lot of investors are needing. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. Another innovation which has come up recently is crowdfunding. So Pledge Me, which is the New Zealand crowdfunding platform, is actually opening up in Brisbane in the next month. And for some while in New Zealand, crowdfunding platforms have been able to work in equity and debt as well as just donations. Now, the Yeasty Boys is not a social enterprise, but they did raise $500,000 in half an hour in order to kickstart their business. And I think in terms of when you think about community being a key part of the benefits of social enterprise, be it also community being able to be a funder, creates a lot of promise for crowdfunding being a really key part of the social enterprise landscape in the future. The last point, just saying on the sort of the holy trinity, so you've got capability building, enabling finance, is being able to get access to markets. And I know there's been a lot of discussion around social procurement in Australia and here in Queensland. And what a powerful thing it can be. Medif, which are an American intermediary who have been doing this a long time, tell a really powerful story. They basically have a network of, or they started a network of 30 social enterprises, and they went around a whole heap of public and private sector organisations and said, give us a contract that these social enterprises can deliver on, because they will give you an excellent product or service, and at the same time they will create employment opportunities for people that are being left behind. In 15 years, they've created over 18,000 jobs, and they've created huge value for the community. So really, it's almost a something for nothing play. It's just about more intelligently partnering, collaborating, and using the system. And I think what we're starting to see in the intermediary space now is, rather than just trying to grow enterprises in a vacuum, it is trying to think about how do we create a system of support. Things like Asda in Scotland, they put a tax on plastic bags. And the money they got from that tax, they gave to Social Investment Scotland, which created a social enterprise investment fund, which invests into social enterprises. And the ones that sell goods which can be retailed through a supermarket, Asda then gives them shelf space. So from the tax on the bag is raising capital to invest in businesses which are delivering good, and then they're being enabled to actually sell those things from the source of the capital in the first place. Intelligent partnering from the corporate sector, working with a government institution to support social enterprise. Our accelerator that we've been iterating over the years, our most recent one is focused on social enterprises providing employment outcomes. And we've got government funding in terms of funding the program, philanthropy providing seed funding to the ventures on the program, the private sector providing mentoring and technical assistance, and then the local council thinking about what procurement opportunities it provides to the teams on the program. So it takes a village to raise a social enterprise. But when you actually start to choreograph these things rather than just leave them to chance, the chances of success rapidly increase, and no one's actually losing. It's just around the additive effect of working together. And I'm going to skip that. So on that idea about, like, it's great to have social enterprises, and there are things you can do to grow them, but the real prize is when you actually take a more strategic approach to create an environment which provides those things at the same time. So that requires a strategy, right? And a strategy works best when it is inclusive of all the major parts of the system. Does have government, does have business, does have local government, does have philanthropy, does have the community. And what we've been struggling with in New Zealand is there have been people doing social enterprise for years, but those other people that need to be at the table haven't been. So we've had a situation where the philanthropic sector's been looking at social enterprise going, oh, you know, we don't really like the commerciality of it. But on the other hand, you know, you've got the business or the business support agency saying social enterprise must be soft. And so some really good work has kind of been falling between the cracks and being underserved. So what we've started to see in New Zealand, and the journey outside of supporting ventures directly for us, has been how do we get to a point where we can actually get an ecosystem up and running. And the first thing is to say we're just seeing this groundswell of activity, and I think that would be true for here in Australia as well. So literally, when we started 5 years ago, there was only a trickle of organisations coming to us. By last year, we had to turn the vast majority of the people away. This is a colleague of mine in the middle. He's with Patu, one of the enterprises we support. And this guy to the right is president of the Mongol. So it's kind of, we were running a workshop and the gang turned up and said, well, what do we do? You know, like, well, we carry on. But it was interesting to see that, you know, sort of a gang leader was taking interest in how social enterprise might actually work, because there was a realisation they've been very damaging to the community and they want to do better for the younger people there. I put this slide up because after lunch, Dave had to go and brief the bishop. Right? You know, so you've got this groundswell of, you know, sort of gang members on one hand and then sort of the bishop and runners of, you know, large social services on the other. And it's been quite a profound experience. The other thing we've kind of been seeing, and a lot of the time because we've been asking the questions, but local government saying, how does this work for us? You know, what problems could this solve for us? How do we support the community better? We've seen the philanthropic community say, well, actually, how do we get more impact from the resources we have? And we've seen the private sector saying, we're sick of spending small amounts of money for CSR budgets. Actually, how do we actually take a shared value approach and use our resources and talent to better effect? And in New Zealand, we've also, sort of seen a process through the settlements with iwi of huge amounts of capital and ambition and optimism starting to come up within the Maori community, and recognising that intergenerational approaches, stewardship of the land, and support of the community, for employment, education, and other social services are of key importance to them. So we've seen this kind of driver of interest, and a lot of the work that we've been doing has been trying to then stitch it together. And of course there are precedents from overseas. Scotland's now on to its second 10-year social enterprise strategy. And recently the state of Victoria released its own statewide strategy on social enterprise. So we could point to these precedents. I was having a conversation before, people saying, oh, New Zealand looks like it's far ahead. We feel the same when we look overseas. Other people are doing it better than us. And I think there's always that sense of it could be better, other people are doing it better, but why not leverage those stories in order to put more pressure to get more action going? So what we finally had to do was get government to the table. And what we realised we couldn't say was that social enterprise is inherently a good thing. We had to relate social enterprise outcomes to the things that governments wanted to shift. So we said, look, this is a response to regional development. It is about fostering a broader sense of entrepreneurship and innovation. It is about empowering local solutions. It is about helping the government reform the way it delivers its own services. It is about unlocking capital from the private sector in new partnerships. And it is about connecting New Zealand to the Sustainable Development Goals and a growing global movement. And the story that we had was we got it up the chain. We got Cabinet to make a number of decisions to support social enterprise, and then it fell over because there was no one around to implement it. No government agency saw it as a priority to do so. So very recently we went back to government and we went to the Prime Minister and we said, we're here to help you implement a stand-up strategy. And going back to the holy trinity of things around building capability, enabling finance, increased market activity, and then also working with the sector to organise itself and articulate what it wants over time, was something we pitched to him, and that has now resulted in a central government investment of about $5.5 million for a 3-year sector development programme. And that's come at a nice time, because in 3 weeks' time we're also hosting the Social Enterprise World Forum. And indeed, this is a nightmare of an event to run. But we wanted to do it because we wanted to create something so noisy and so big, and to say to the government, look, you're hosting the world, what's your story? So by having this event and not asking the world in, it gave us an opportunity to apply friendly pressure and leverage to the government to actually come to the table and invest in sector development. So that's kind of sort of where we've got to now, that New Zealand's sort of, I think, on this sort of profound moment where we've got a groundswell of people wanting to do the work. We've got the buy-in, if tentative in some cases, from the corporate, philanthropic, global government and community sectors, and now we've got government to the table. So I think we're about to go into a very exciting time that if we do it well, we can create a really thriving ecosystem. It's also interesting to note that a lot of the things we thought in that strategy had been done before. And it's almost, I think there's the second wave. The people that did it the first time around, like Scotland, got all the nosebleeds. They had to do it almost organically. But now we can actually see how they've landed and think, what's applicable to us? And how do we architect this a little bit more intentionally rather than just running down blind alleys? So listen, this is the really last section. It was a short one, and I appreciate your patience. Because increasingly my focus is like, if we're going to go to a real scale, how do we actually not just have support for the entrepreneurs we have now, but literally how do we create a whole generation of people that have the competencies and capacities and compassion to lead change into a new economy? What does education look like in relation to this space of social innovation, civic entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship? And I was fortunately in the States earlier in the year, in Hannant, by going to Harvard, and they're like, oh yeah, look, any business school that's worth its salt has a program in this area now. And that was heartening to hear. Harvard's saying it's okay, so surely everyone will think it's okay. But one of my reservations there, though, was it was kind of almost an iteration on the business sort of thinking, rather than actually thinking about this as a major transformational shift. You know, so if we just put impact on the top of business models, rather than actually think about a value shift about why we're doing the work in the first place, are we actually going to get the work that we want? So the kind of thinking now is it's like we need to have programs which do teach the skills around entrepreneurship and innovation, the technical stuff, but also recognising that you can do all the fancy innovation in the world, but you're going to come up against the real world. And you're also going to have to equip people with the political skills, the social skills to be able to negotiate those things in the real world. And then lastly, we've also got to build learning and programs which increase the emotional capacity of people to lead change. A lot of this work is facilitative. A lot of this stuff is not having an idea and driving it forward. It's about listening and being reorientated to the solution that's actually needed. It's about working in complexity, about working with multi-stakeholder groups, about working with communities. It's about service rather than just pushing your idea forward. So I guess, you know, looking ahead, and my sort of invitation to the university would be to, you know, sort of how do we continue to build programs which come up with a skill set like this, which think about the capacities and competencies which are really going to embed a whole set of empower a new generation of change makers to strengthen both our economies, our communities, and also our environment. Thank you.
Wow. That was a lot of information and that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex. I'm sure we could spend days listening and talking to you.
Careful what you wish for.
Indeed. And look, I'm really proud and hopeful for what we're doing here at Logan and Griffith University. I guess listening to some of those key points, I'm really pleased that I think we are on the journey here. And particularly, I'd like to shamelessly plug our supporters here tonight. And if you notice some brochures on your seats, the Independent Social Enterprise Network, there's going to be an expo. Details are here. And Tony and Jane are here tonight, happy to talk to you about what you might like to do to feature your social enterprise. And also, congratulations to Griffith University for having the foresight to include the Entrepreneurship Innovation Public Lecture Series here for industry and especially NGOs, and also to the Business School who's launched that degree here at Logan. And also we've got Professor Evan Douglas here with us tonight, and he's also recently launched the Eunice Social Enterprise Centre. So Griffith is really putting a lot of time and energy, and I think there's such a groundswell of interest, and I think Queensland has to do a bit better job than New South Wales and Victoria in terms of getting government to the table. So it's been a really timely visit, and thank you so much. And I'm sure there's going to be some questions and comments. So Lainey is going to come over to you if you put your hand up if you've got a question or a comment. So please introduce yourself and ask your question to Alex. I'm sure he's going to be very pleased to answer any questions or listen to any stories you might like to share. Who's first? We've got a couple already.
Hi, thanks Alex, that was a great presentation. My name is Clinton. My question is about, you had a slide up there about the definitions, about how you have the traditional charities and traditional corporates on each end of the spectrum. As in this time, sort of when we're trying to grow this idea of a social enterprise, my question is, what's stopping, say, a BHP or a large corporate from putting aside a small percentage of their profits and giving it to UNICEF and then calling themselves social enterprises? Can you see like it becoming such a trendy thing to be called a social enterprise or to be labelled with that group, that even big corporates that obviously don't really have much of a social focus, they're going to just give a bit of money and then call themselves social enterprise?
I mean, the easy solution is to come up with a suitable legal form, right? You know, so you actually have a legal form which, you know, is the intuitive thing to adopt, and at that point, you know, you're governed by law that if you say your primary purpose is social, then if you're not actually delivering on that, then effectively, in the New Zealand context, you'd be a breach of the Companies Act. So there is there's a simple solution to stop that, and it's legislation. But also, I mean, I think in anything like this, you know, we had the whole greenwashing thing, but eventually people see through it. You know, so I think there's a sense of, like, you can't manage risk completely. You can't stop mavericks, you can't stop cowboys, but there are certain ways that you can manage that risk. You know, it's just like that alignment between the integrity between around stated purpose, you know, the degree that that might be represented in the Constitution, is the business model aligned, and are you demonstrating that you're delivering, you know, impact consummate to your overall turnover? So if you're calling yourself a social enterprise and you turn over 200 million, but, you know, your impact is affecting, like, you know, I don't know, 5, you know, sort of people on, you know, sort of a suburb, you know, like, people will see through that. So I think some of the problems, we're tying ourselves up in knots because we're trying to manage risk that we can't actually manage. And that's actually creating a dysfunction and a limitation on what is actually a fast-moving space. And we should be less concerned about social enterprise being a noun and more interested about social enterprise being a verb. If people want to do good, let them, you know, but, you know, sort of, but obviously, you know, we can call it a lot simpler straight away if we have the purpose legal forms which holds them accountable in law as well as the public.
A question from the lady with the purple scarf?
Hello, thanks for the talk. My name's Sylvia, and I just noticed that often social enterprises, like changing businesses that already exist as businesses. But have you worked with welfare organisations who perhaps were funded in the past by government, but are now changing to become sort of private or not-for-profit, who probably already have a lot of the community and the listening and those sort of skills already?
Yes, yes, we have. But what we've kind of learned is that the business development approach or the capacity building approach, you know, it's like eat your own dog food, right? It has to be focused on the customers that we're serving. And working with an organisation that has been working largely dependent on bulk government funding or grants and donations requires a different nature of support than maybe like some racing entrepreneurs, you know, which are, you know, have other issues and challenges. One of the key things we've learned around the bigger organisations which are more in that not-for-profit space is a lot of the impediment is at the governance level. So their boards are voluntary, meet irregularly, and check out their, you know, sort of a lot of their sort of better thinking at the door of the boardroom because they really feel the burden of the risk of doing the wrong thing with an organisation which is very much part of the community. So our sense is it's very difficult to work with a traditional not-for-profit unless you've got full buy-in from the board down and that they are prepared to create space and invest in their own capacity to innovate and realise that the timeline could be considerable. So the alarm bells always go off when you have a not-for-profit in financial trouble who suddenly wants to do social enterprise. It's kind of like, that could be too late, to be honest. And the last thing you want to do is try and do something you're not used to doing when the house is burning. So we take that kind of initial engagement really seriously, and we certainly are not evangelists, and we wouldn't encourage an organisation to go unless they were prepared to commit to it and recognise their own capacity and internal capacity development they would have to invest in to get where they would need to go. But it has been done and can be done. And not least because a lot of the organisations, not all of them, but actually a lot of them have considerable balance sheets. You know, a lot of them do have a lot of resources that if they are willing to really commit to a process, they can actually fund themselves very effectively.
Hello, my name's Vicky Lyons and I'm from Accessibility. My question is about when you're starting up a social enterprise or you're an entrepreneur and you're taking that social enterprise direction. How do you, when it happens very fast, you've got that spark, and in the beginning it seems slow, but it actually happens over a very short period of time. How do you stop that burnout from occurring? Because you might have a great board to support you, but the reality is it's usually one or two people that are doing that drive and doing all that connection. How do you stop that burnout from happening?
I mean, it's quite a difficult question to answer in a different way, actually, because a key capacity of what we see as successful entrepreneurs is actually coachability. They are prepared to listen to other people, and they're prepared to actually be self-aware enough about where they're being effective and not effective. So, you know, this whole idea of the entrepreneur sort of like conquering the world, we don't buy into. We don't like working with individuals. We prefer working with teams, and we like basically people that are focused on listening and understanding the problem and the people they're working with, rather than just rolling out their ideas. And indeed, our whole methodology is around this constant, you know, hypothesis, test, learn, change. And I think that also goes into the kind of, you know, the way that they are aware of their own cycle within that. And certainly, you know, when I talked about different capability building tools, a lot of people get confused with mentors and coaches. Mentors just talk at you, right? And it's quite good because they often know what they're doing. Coaches ask you questions, and a good coach will help, you know, can help that sort of self-monitoring and self-help. But I mean, look, none of this is kind of easy, and certainly there is a time at an early stage when you have to go really quickly, and there's almost a sense of you've got to make some sacrifices. You know, you can't do this part-time and you can't do it slowly, because otherwise you never can actually get ahead of the curve, you know. So, yeah, so there's a few things there, and hopefully that's sort of some use. But I mean, a critical part of this is the money. You know, it's not like money to solve my problems, but it's about money to make sure that people aren't putting their livelihoods at risks. You know, like, I mean, we've had situations where people are mortgaging their own homes. Now, that's tough when someone is on the brink of making a lot of money. But it's a tough situation for us when actually they're not going to make a lot of money, they're going to create a lot of impact, but they're actually mortgaging their own private asset. You know, so, yeah, it's difficult stuff.
Because my way of looking at it is social enterprise is not about becoming wealthy, it's about enabling other people. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question? Up the back?
Good evening, Alex. You touched on social benefit bonds. I'm just wondering how prevalent and available those are in Australia for capital raising?
Look, the social impact bonds have become, I think, a bit of a lightning conductor. There's a lot of merit in some of the ideas behind there, you know, about trying to say, how do we understand the real value that's being created? And then how do we actually shift the risk from the taxpayer effectively onto a private investor? So, I mean, you know, like, there are some interesting ideas, but my experience of them has been they're also very expensive. You know, so there's been a lot of money going into consultants, lawyers, you know, management consultants, to almost over-elaborate something, you know. And I don't want to be unfair, but, you know, because I think there is a lot of merit in them, but I'm still waiting to see them, you know, to actually something which can be scalable and actually, you know, sort of, you know, efficient in terms of cost. Certainly in New Zealand, the government tried to have a go at one and it completely stuffed it up. And, you know, that sort of, it's the kind of, government isn't very good at risk-taking, and it's trying to do something risky, and it got the fear, and it just made it more difficult than it needed to, and then the whole thing sort of fell over. What I'm more interested in is thinking about how do we co-produce between commissioners and providers, you know, sort of results-based approaches, which actually say that, look, we've got the capability to deliver stuff, you've got the resource to fund it. how do we come to a fair way of starting to move the resource to, you know, evidenced results, but do it in a way which is more collaborative than over-engineered with, sometimes partners which are not values aligned. You know, in the UK, our investors came in because they knew the government wasn't going to let them fail. So it was just rent-seeking behaviour. So there's good stuff in it, and if we look at them through an eye of an experiment, I think they have value. But they're certainly, I think, a long way from being, you know, sort of a scalable solution.
Well, I hope that one day we can see you launch a prospectus where we can invest in all these diversified social enterprises.
Yeah, but I mean, see, this is the myth, right? I mean, social, if you looked at the UK impact investment thing, like social bonds were only like 3% of the total impact investment. More than 6 times the value of that has been invested for communities investing in their own community enterprises. You know, so again, they're really valuable, but they're highlighted in a disproportionate way. You know, a lot of the impact investment is through debt, it's through revenue share, it's through equity if the organisations are, you know, suitable. So, you know, sort of, they are an interesting innovation, but they are not the main picture. Investment is going on in many different shapes and forms and growing quite rapidly, just through sort of more conventional ways.
Thanks so much for the talk. My name is Marco, and I run a volunteer program at a not-for-profit. We all know that not-for-profit rely heavily on volunteering, okay? And my questions are on utilizing volunteers in social enterprise, especially in a model where you said side by side, which is like a cafe, totally for business, but for profit, but they're utilizing employment from unvaluable segment, could be refugees or others. At that case, when you're utilizing volunteers, that could potentially increase your profit. Do you have any concerns about that?
So we would look at it like this. That volunteering is a good thing because it builds social capital and people are actually wanting to do it a lot of the time. You know, they're actually getting something from it as well. But you should not build a business model which is dependent on it. And you certainly shouldn't pay or not pay your essential team. Yeah? So absolutely volunteers, but do not depend on it. And we are absolutely about, you know, just because you're delivering change doesn't mean you can pay substandard wages. So, you know, and indeed, you know, I think there is a higher prevalence of social and community enterprises paying living wages rather than not. So in some situations it can be quite, you know, it can be a bit more challenging when some of your employees are also receiving some benefits, particularly in the disability space, which means if you start paying them a certain amount, they lose, or, you know, but that's kind of a different kind of policy or, you know, sort of welfare sort of challenge to crack. But in principles, all good, but you should not exploit or depend on them.
Okay, last question. Down the front here, lady. You're doing your 10,000 steps today.
My question was something connected with what others already asked. My name is Sanjeev. I'm relating this with my experience in India and another non-profit organization which is out of New York. So the perspective was different in these two organizations. One is like charity, which is like giving out or handing out what you have. So in the end of that sequence, probably the organization itself is going to be needing some handouts because it's just not sustainable. Whereas in the American model was essentially like building capacity. It was called not even non-profit. They prefer to call it as not for profit. That means they work like a profit organization, but they're not working for the profit. They're working to achieve outcomes.
Yep.
So that's the whole difference in perspective. And that relates to the tax part. We mentioned that you could get tax incentives. I think that could be a way, instead of the welfare or this philanthropic bonds, that model, wherein the return is the issue. You don't get returns on them, so it's not an investment model. Probably tax offset can be a good solution. Like this gentleman was asking about BHP spending probably 0.000, 10 zeros, and then 1% of the turnover. Instead, they said, like, you know, whatever you claim to be doing for social enterprise investment can be written off against your tax, because it eventually is going to be used by the government to invest in these social projects anyway. So that could be a workable model. But of course the caveat there would be that they have to be long-term, like housing or something that has got long-term return, not something short-term, obviously. That could be the model. What do you think?
That's wonderful. Look, I mean, I think the point, but what I was trying to get at is social enterprise can be done well, you know, whether it's coming from a place which was a traditional charity and now has got a good enterprise model, or someone that is coming from a business-first perspective. You know, and it was just to say that both can be done well and both can be done badly. And what we should be looking at is recognising this is a messy, evolving, dynamic space, and be less concerned with who's in the club and who's not in the club, but paying more attention to the integrity of any given organisation. You know, does it have integrity? Does it have good governance? Does it have a transparency? Is it accountable? And if those things are aligned, I don't care what you call yourself, you know, all, from my point of view, is we're finding a way to shift the world to a better place.
And a burning question up the back.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rocky. So we are talking about 4 billion people at the bottom of the pyramid, about the Sustainable Development Goals. And now the Harvard Business School academics are arguing that if we have to create a scaled impact, it's not possible for the social enterprises and hybrid entrepreneurs, all those entities to solve that level of scaled problem. Now, where do you see future of social enterprises in future as a collaborator in that ecosystem you mentioned, or an autonomous entity to make some positive contributions?
Yeah, so, I mean, the first thing, I mean, maybe just challenge that, because the biggest social enterprise in the world, Mondragon Cooperatives, turns over 15 billion euros. You know, like, so, you know, like, I think it's like the 10th biggest company in Spain. You know, so like, social enterprises are known to operate at scale, but, you know, potentially in a slightly different kind of model than, you know, just in a sort of a purely kind of top-down sort of market sense. But the way that I think we'll go in the future is, rather than social enterprises, we'll have system enterprise. So we would start to see, how does government work with community, work with business, work with other organisations to actually not just partner with each other, but to fundamentally create new models which create value for a broader number of people. You know, so this whole idea about not just having good ideas and growing them, but actually understanding what is the system doing and what do we need to do, where does the investment need to go, where does the innovation need to happen, then who is best placed to deliver those things is the place that I think we need to go. So moving from, you know, effectively entrepreneurship to systems innovation. And that's where I think we'll go in the future.
Thank you.
I'm sure Alex won't mind staying around for a photo or a bit of a chat if you're not in a hurry to run away. And look, really good questions, a lot of content tonight, so I hope you all got something out of tonight. So we've got a little gift for you. Thank you so much. And hopefully you'll all come back to the next Entrepreneurship Lecture Series, which is going to be on social media, and the date is 19th of September. We put on the drinks and the nibblies, and there's really good networking. And again, we thank all our partners for helping make tonight possible, and it's been very interesting. We hope you enjoy your visit.